Welcome back to Backspace Academy. In this lecture we'll explore using EBS or Elastic Block Storage as a storage option for Amazon EC2. We'll create an instance which will have an extra EBS volume attached to it, and then we're going to go into the Linux operating system and mount that volume. We'll then take a snapshot of that volume and use that snapshot to create a copy of that EBS volume. Okay, so from the EC2 management console, we'll launch an instance, and I'm going to just select the Amazon Linux AMI. Now I'm just going to slow down here and explain a few things. So we can see here it's with our T2 micro. For instance storage, it only has the option for EBS. There's no option for attaching an instant store to that. So when we scroll down, we can see that most of them don't until we get to an M3 medium, and we can see there an M3 medium can have instant store storage attached to it. You may want to consider using instant store storage if you've got a batch operation and you just wanted a device, a storage device that is going to be used for storage of batch data that is not going to need to be persisted afterwards, so it can be lost after you've finished with that batch operation. And so that's the kind of thing that you would use an instant store for, but it's normally with larger instances. I'm not going to go into instant store. It's pretty well the same sort of process that you would do with an EBS volume, but I just don't want you to get a bill at the end of the month if you forget to terminate all this stuff. If you forget to terminate a T2 micro instance, it's not a major deal for you financially, but if you get a bigger instance, you might be a bit surprised when you get your bill at the end of the month. So I'm going to stick with a T2 micro and be responsible for you. Next, configure instance details. So we want to make sure that we have a public IP automatically assigned for that. We'll leave everything else as it is. Add storage. So we can see there, as we normally have, we have our root storage there, which has a storage name of dev, or device name of dev/xvda, and the snapshot which would come from our Linux AMI. And we can see there that we've selected a general purpose. Now we're going to add a new volume additional to that. And if we look at the selection there, we've only got the option of EBS. But if this was a large instance, then we would have an option of EBS or instant store type storage. The device name that has been selected for us there is dev/SDB, but we can change that if we want. If we're going to be attaching multiple volumes, they will have different device names, and we would need to take note of the device names so that we can recognize them when we go to mount them. We also have the option of creating this EBS volume from an EBS snapshot, and we could select that. We don't have one, so we're not going to do that. And we have our volume type. So here it's automatically selected as a general purpose type, but we could do provisioned IOPS if we want, and we can put our IOPS that we would like to provision for this drive. We could also go down to magnetic if we wanted to save costs and if speed was not a major deal for us. I'm going to stick with general purpose. Now I'd like you to take very good note here is that by default, delete on termination has been selected for the root volume, but by default, manually added EBS volumes are not deleted on termination. You need to remember that. So by default, root are deleted on termination, but by default, manually added EBS volumes are not. But of course you can change that here if you'd like. The reason why manually added EBS volumes are not normally deleted on termination is that they normally contain data, and if something goes wrong with your EC2 instance and it is terminated, you don't necessarily want to use that data. You want that data to persist afterwards and use it maybe later on with another instance. But for this lab, or for this hands-on exercise, I'm going to select delete on termination for both of them, because I want to make sure that when you terminate this instance, everything is cleaned up afterwards and you're not going to get a bill at the end of the month. So I'll just click on Review and Launch. And I'll just select a key pair that I've used before and launch that instance. And after a certain amount of time, we're going to have our instance up and running. If we look at the description of our instance, and we scroll down to block devices, we can see that we've got our root device of XVDA and also our manually added EBS volume, which is at SDB. So if I just click on that, it'll give us the details of this. So we can see that we've got an EBS volume ID there, and it is attached, and it has delete on termination selected for true. Now, although it has been attached, it's not necessarily available for us to use with that instance until we mount it. So we're going to go now into the command line interface, and we're going to connect into this instance, and we're going to mount it using the Linux operating system. Okay, so I've just connected into that EC2 instance. Now the first thing I want to do is just to list the block volumes that are attached to this instance. So I just do ls or list blk, and that will list our volumes there. So we can see we have our root volume as of XVDA, and that is mounted as a root volume there. It has a mount point there. And we also see that there is XVDB, which is our manually added EBS volume, and there is no mount point for that. So we need to create a mount point. The first thing we'll do is we'll have a look and see whether or not a file system is actually on that disk. So the command we use there is sudo for root. We'll need root access to do that. File -s / and the name of our EBS volume device. Now all the details of this are in the AWS documentation, so if you get lost, just refer to that, and it'll be pretty straightforward for you. And there we can see it's come back with data, which means that there is no file system that has been created on this volume, so we need to do that. Now the command that we use to create a file system is sudo mkfs, and then we have the -t option and the file system type, and then we have the device name after that. And there you can see it's created that file system for us. Now to check whether or not we've successfully created that file system, we can just check the file systems now. So we can sudo file -s and then the name of that volume, and it will tell us whether there is a file system on there. So there is a file system there. We've got the ID of that file system as well. So now I'm just going to make a directory that we can use as a mount point for this EBS volume. So we just make a directory called data. And now we'll mount our EBS volume to that mount point directory. So now that we've mounted our volume, we need to make sure that it's mounted when the instance reboots. So to do that, we need to edit our fs tab file. Now, if you don't understand what all this means, don't worry too much, because this is not a course on the Linux operating system. It's a course on AWS. So you just need to know how to go through this process of mounting a volume. You don't need to be an expert in the Linux operating system, but it is a good thing if you're going to be using Linux in the future to learn a bit more about it. So what we're going to do now is just edit or first of all, we'll make a backup of our fs tab file. So before I edit the file, I need to get the ID of the EBS volume. I can use the device name, but it is more reliable to use the ID of the device. So I'll just do that same command that we used before to get the file system information. And there I can see is that the ID there. So I'm just going to copy that, UID equals. Just going to copy that. And now I'm going to edit that file, the fs tab file, in nano. So just sudo nano and then the file, and there we can get into the edited screen. So you can see there's a number of entries, and we need to add another one for our new amount. So we'll just scroll down to the bottom of the list there, and we're just going to put another entry in. It's going to paste it in. So what we're going to put in is we're going to put in the ID of that volume that we got from that command previously. Then we're going to put in the mount point directory, which is data or /data, then the file system type, and then we're going to do defaults, and then no fail, no fail, and then we're going to do 0 and 2. And once we've done that, that will enable that the EBS volume will be mounted upon reboot. So I'll just do Control X, and if we want to save that, we just click on yes, we do want to save that, and enter. And so now we can just check that it works. So we do sudo mount-a, and there's no errors coming back, so that's fine. So now we're just going to cd into that data mount point directory, which is where our EBS volume is now mounted. And we just do a dir on that, and we can see there's nothing in there. And so now I'll just create a test file there. So just do sudo touch, just create an empty file there of test.txt. And I'll just dir into that now. Okay, so we've successfully created an EC2 instance with an additional EBS volume. We've mounted that volume using the Linux operating system. We've added a file to that volume. What I'd like to do now is to create a snapshot of that volume, and then use that snapshot to launch another EC2 instance with an EBS volume that will be an exact replica of that EBS volume that we created the snapshot from. Okay, so back in the EC2 management console, if I select the description of that EC2 instance and we scroll down to the EBS volume that we've attached there, dev/SDB, and if I click on that, and if I click then on the EBS ID, I can get the details of that EBS volume which we've got there. So what I want to do now is to create a snapshot of this volume. So I'll just go into Actions, Create Snapshot. I'll give it a name. So I'll just give it a name, backspace dash, and then the details of the volume. And just click on Create now. And it has started. And so we can view this snapshot now, so we just click on View. Now after a certain amount of time it will be available for us to use, so there is our completed snapshot. So we just go into Actions and we can create a volume from this snapshot. So we're just going to leave those the same as they are there, and we'll create a volume for this snapshot. And we can view the volume there, and there's our volume ready to go. So now jumping back into the EC2 management console, I'm going to launch another instance of the same type using the same AMI, but I'm going to use the snapshot that we just created to attach a volume from, or an identical volume from the one that we just created a snapshot of. So just go into Launch Instance. We'll select the same Linux AMI that we selected before. We'll select the same T2 micro that we had. We'll again put a public IP there in. We'll add storage now. So now we can add a new volume, EBS, and we can put the same device name there. And now we just got to search for our snapshot. We just type in, because I know it started with backspace, so just do backspace, and it will come up with that snapshot there. So it's always a good idea to put a description in so as you can find your snapshots a lot easier, but I didn't put a description in, but I know that that was the snapshot. It was the only one that I created. And I'll just do delete on termination again. So what we will be doing is we'll be creating, as before, a Linux instance with an EBS volume attached, but this time it will already have a file system created on it from a snapshot. So we just need to mount that volume afterwards, and we'll have that ready to use. So just go into Review and Launch, and launch using a key pair that we've used before. Okay, so after a while our instance will be up and running, and so we can have a look at that now. And we can see there that we have our extra block device as well. So we've gone through, we've done it two ways. We've created a EBS volume from scratch on launch, and we've mounted that and we've added files to it, and we've also gone the other way of doing it with a snapshot as well. So I think you've got a pretty good understanding now of EBS volumes, and I'll see you in the next lecture.